Hi everyone, welcome to History on Trial. This is Dr. Tracy McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator. We are going to be talking about the psychology of identity, and we're going to be focusing on one group in particular, but by extension on a couple of other groups. And so we're going to be looking at who is Esau historically. Now, in the past, we've looked at different tribal groups around the globe who have that identity in terms of surname, in terms of tribal name, but we're going to look at who is Esau in antiquity and the implications for current times. The source we're going to be looking at is PSEUDODOXIA Epidemica, and this is inquiries into very many received tenets and commonly presumed truths. And so what this author from the 1600s is doing is clarifying some of the things that have been presumed and offering some alternative explanations for a number of things and a number of different vantage points that many people may have not thought about, or people may have thought about some of the vantage points, but may have been lacking in someone just coming out and saying something to verify what they were thinking in terms of the research that they were doing. We're going to start off with a commentary related to the Red Sea. And so there's a discussion about the identity of the Red Sea and how the Red Sea acquired its name. And you can see at the top that it identifies the Red Sea as the Erythraean Sea, which ties in with the name of a country with a similar name in East Africa. Anyway, this commentary discusses the Red Sea not as a sea that was red because of sediment in some part of the sea, which is what many people presume, but it talks about the Red Sea and other seas being named after the people that were there. And in this case, the assertion is that the Red Sea is named after Esau or Edom, meaning red. And this also relates back to Adam, also meaning ruddy red. You can also see down below that there is a connection between the name of this sea and also a former king. The author discusses Edom, Esau, Idumea as occupying the coast, and so he is identifying Esau as a maritime people, a coastal people, a seafaring people. And this is noteworthy because the author goes on to indicate that the ancient Greeks knew Esau or referred to Esau and Edom and the descendants, the posterity, as the Phoenicians or the red men. Now, this, of course, turns the historical narrative on its head because this is not a typical assertion. It's not a typical assertion for a number of reasons. One, Esau, Edom, is supposed to be descended from Shem. The Phoenicians are supposed to be descended from Ham. And so this creates a bit of confusion here, but this also goes along with the narratives coming out of Ireland related to their history and their ancestry. And this idea of being red men also ties in with some of the groups, the tribal groups that have been identified in the Americas. The author also indicates that Esau, Edom, the Phoenicians, had a colony of their own and a plantation, and it was near Spain on an island, and it was named Erythra. This entire assertion is confounding because you have another group of people known as the Moors who also identify as the Phoenicians. And so at this point, you have to start doing some sort of logical analysis to get to an understanding of these assimilated dynamics and identities. And so you have the possibility here, looks like a strong possibility, with both of these groups being identified as the Phoenicians. There's a strong possibility that Edom, Esau, and the Moors are one. You also have the question of if the Phoenicians are Shemites or Semites, how can they also be Hamites, unless of course you're talking about descendancy towards the mother's end on one side, and then you are identifying as something else based upon the father's side. The author goes on to make a very interesting assertion after identifying Esau, Edom as the Phoenicians. The author goes on and indicates that the Red Sea is in America. In addition to discussing Esau remaining on the coast and being a coastal group, the author also identifies what's known as the tribe of Judah and indicates that the tribe of Judah is located on the east side toward the rising of the sun. And here you see the author goes on to have a discussion about the identities of different groups of people, from Canaan to Ham or Ham. And you also see some discussions related to the Negroes. This section about the Negroes and the identity of the Negroes actually follows the discussion about the Red Sea. And so there's an entire section on this particular group of people. But the author makes this notation in a sort of question format related to whether the Negroes were the ones who occupied the promised land, and then having some questions about the ultimate identity of the Negroes. And in case you're not familiar, we're going to quickly go over the information related to Edom or Esau. Again, it means red, and you can see the other name is Idumea, meaning the descendants of Esau. So if someone is a descendant of Esau, they would be known as an Edomi. It looks like Edomite, however. And you can also see that Esau is identified as the elder twin brother of Jacob. Esau derives from Adam, and Adam refers to man or mankind when you see the lowercase a, and it also refers to this idea of being red or ruddy. What is striking and noteworthy about this idea of Adam is not only that Adam is considered red or ruddy, or that's a part of that root, there's another root that goes with this, and it is the word hypocrite. And so we're going to quickly look at what that means and the implications of that word as a descriptor, because it's very interesting that Isaac, which would be the father of Jacob and Esau, would have two children who would both have identities that are tinged with this idea of not dealing fairly or rightly. And so we're going to quickly look at this description of hypocrite. And you can see hypocrite is a person who indulges in hypocrisy. And it's rooted in this idea of being an actor. And so essentially that means that this entity, Adam, Esau, Edom, this entity often pretends to be what it is not. In other words, acting. Pretending. Merriam-Webster goes on to identify a hypocrite as a person who puts on a false appearance of virtue or religion. And that is important in looking at some of the groups in antiquity and some of their relationships with what would be considered religious missions or missions in the name of a variety of religions. And here we have finally another discussion about hypocrite. Another way of understanding hypocrite is the idea of being two-faced. It means double dealing, false, having two faces. And this is reminiscent of the film that recently came out known as Us, where individuals were basically appropriating identity. And so there is a suggestion by this author, at least, that there is a dynamic of identity appropriation. And so therefore there's a lot of identity confusion going on. And it's important to point out that in terms of lineage, it is not possible for a person to have their paternal lineage be that of a Phoenician who is a Canaanite, and also be that of a Phoenician who is considered a Shemite or a Semite. And so that's not possible, because you have the DNA, the male DNA, going from father to son to father to son, and you are talking about two separate male lines. And so the Phoenicians either have to be one or the other in terms of that paternal line, but they cannot be both. And looking at the totality of history as far as we have it, it does appear that Esau, Edom, does fit that description of Phoenician. And it also looks as though those who identify as Irish, many of them, they also fit that description. And so that is something that people can do a little bit more research on, to see if you find any more information that contradicts that or confirms that. What was also noteworthy in our discussion was this idea of the Red Sea being in America. As we wrap things up, we have looked at who is Esau in this particular narrative. Now, what's important about this is that this narrative calls into question the identity of several groups now. It calls into question the identity of Esau or Edom. It also calls into question the actual identity of those who identify as Moor, because what this suggests is if the people identifying as Moor and some other individuals on the west coast of Africa, if those individuals identify as Moor, but they also identify as Phoenician, according to this author, they are also identifying as Esau or Edom. And so this brings into question a number of issues. There's also the issue of this identity of the red man that is known as the identity of the American Indian. And so you have here this identity that places Esau as the American Indian, or at least one group of American Indians, because of course we discussed the diversity in terms of phenotype of individuals who were found here, and red man was one of the identities found here, or one of the phenotypes found here. And so another interesting thing is about the Red Sea. So not only do you have Esau, or the red man, being found here and also in Africa, but this author from the 1600s identifies the Red Sea as being located in America. And so what it looks like is that you have a history of different groups merging and then assimilating and creating new identities over time. And so these identities, these people, these groups actually have multiple faces. And so you can't just depend upon looking at someone, just looking at a phenotype to determine where people have come from, because inherent to this discussion about all of this assimilation is this idea of individuals looking quite diverse but being the same. In other words, e pluribus unum. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.